For most people, money is a constant source of worry. For Isabella Cortez, it had become a language she spoke more fluently than her native tongue. Billionaire investor, board member of 3 multinational companies, regular guest on financial news shows, Isabella was a kind of woman who could move markets with a single interview. Journalists called her the Iron Mind of Wall Street. Behind her back, rivals called her something colder. But there was one thing no one would ever dare say to her face, that for all her expertise, she had forgotten what money felt like in human hands. On a rainy Thursday evening, trapped between meetings, Isabella ducked into a quiet restaurant she used to visit when she was just another overworked analyst with more debt than savings. Back then, this place had been a luxury she carefully budgeted for. A bowl of soup, a cheap glass of wine, a moment to feel like life was more than fluorescent office lights and spreadsheets. Now, the hostess recognized her immediately, eyes widening. Ms. Cortez, of course, right this way. She was ushered to a corner table by the window, away from prying eyes. Her bodyguards took their positions discreetly near the entrance. Her assistant texted her the next morning's agenda before the water even arrived. She should have felt powerful. Instead, she felt impossibly far away from the woman who used to count coins to make sure she could leave a tip. "Good evening," a voice said, warm and steady. "My name is Lucas. I'll be taking care of you tonight." She looked up. The waiter standing beside her wore a simple black uniform and a name tag. His dark hair tied back neatly. His eyes were alert, but not nervous. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was doing, even if the rest of the world had decided his job made him invisible. She ordered without looking at the menu, habit, not arrogance. Then, in a rare moment of boredom and reckless humor, she smirked and said, "You seem like a smart guy, Lucas. Got any financial advice for a tired billionaire?" She meant it as a joke, a careless throwaway line she'd forget in 5 seconds. Lucas did not laugh. He studied her face, just for a heartbeat. Then he said very calmly, "Yes, don't forget what it felt like when $10 was the difference between eating and pretending you weren't hungry." The words hit her harder than any market crash she'd ever watched. For a second, Isabella forgot how to breathe. He bowed his head slightly. "I'll put your order in," he added, as if he hadn't just sliced through the thick armor she wore around her life. As he walked away, she realized something unsettling. In one sentence, a man who refilled water glasses for a living had told her more truth than most of the millionaires and billionaires she sat with every day. Before this story goes any further, there's something important. Where in the world are you watching from right now? Take a moment to tell us your city or country in the comments, and stay with this video until the very end, because what this billionaire learns from a waiter will completely change how you think about wealth, success, and the value of real wisdom. For a full second after Lucas walked away, Isabella just stared at the empty space he'd left beside her table. The restaurant noise faded into a distant blur. Her mind replayed his words like a broken audio clip. Don't forget what it felt like when $10 was the difference between eating and pretending you weren't hungry. He had said it so simply. No drama, no accusation, just truth. Her first instinct was to be offended. Who was he to speak to her like that? To assume anything about her past? People didn't talk to Isabella Cortez that way. They flattered her. They feared her. They tried to impress her. They didn't hand her reality, like a bill dropped on the table. But under the flicker of offense was something else, something raw and uncomfortable. Recognition. Once upon a time, $10 had been that difference. She could still remember standing in a checkout line with a box of pasta, a jar of sauce, and a sick feeling in her stomach as she calculated whether her card would be declined. She remembered skipping meals in college, telling her friends she wasn't hungry when the truth was she couldn't afford to join them. Had she forgotten? No, she'd buried it. There was a difference. She watched Lucas move between tables, refilling water, taking orders, smiling at customers who barely glanced at his face. He wasn't showy. He didn't look bitter. He moved with the kind of calm efficiency she recognized immediately. The quiet professionalism of someone who knew how to carry more than he was paid to hold. When he returned with her appetizer, she found herself studying him with the same focus she usually reserved for CEOs and founders. You always give financial advice with the bread service? She asked, trying to regain some control of the situation with a joke. Lucas smiled faintly. Only when I'm asked, he said, and only when it sounds like the question might be more serious than the person wants to admit. She tilted her head. You think I was serious? I think, he said carefully, that bored people with everything they need don't ask about money. People who ask are trying to remember something they've started to lose. The accuracy of that observation made her skin prickle. She could have shut the conversation down right there. She could have pulled rank, reminded him that she was a client and he was staff. But instead, she heard herself say, "Sit down." He blinked. "Pardon?" "Just for a minute," she said. "No one's looking. Humor me." He glanced around. The restaurant was busy, but not chaotic. His fellow servers were occupied. The manager was at the bar, facing the other direction. After the slightest hesitation, he pulled out the chair opposite her and sat, perched on the edge, ready to spring back up if needed. "Okay," he said. 1 minute. She leaned forward, studying him as if he were a market trend. "Who are you?" she asked. "To talk like that about hunger?" "Someone who's been hungry," he said simply. No self-pity, no performance, just fact. That was when she realized something she'd almost forgotten. Not all experts sit on panels. Not all wisdom wears a suit. If this moment, this shift in power between a billionaire and a waiter, is hitting you, and you want more stories that expose the truth behind money, status, and character, take a second to subscribe to the channel. We're working hard to reach 1,000 subscribers, and your support helps bring more powerful stories like this to life. For a few moments after Lucas stepped away to check on another table, Isabella sat perfectly still, as if any sudden movement might break whatever fragile spell had just settled over her life. All evening, she had been bouncing between two worlds without realizing it. On her phone, in neatly formatted emails and notifications, lived the world everyone saw. Stock alerts, board updates, interview requests, strategy decks waiting for her approval. In that world, she was a force, sharp, composed, endlessly decisive. Across the table, in the reflection of the restaurant's dim lighting, lived another world. The one where a man in a black uniform with a name tag had just looked her in the eye and spoken to her like he didn't fear her at all. She realized with a jolt that she'd grown so used to being handled that she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be seen. When Lucas returned with a fresh carafe of water, he moved as if nothing extraordinary had happened. His hands were steady, his focus split between his tasks and the subtle cues of the room. He refilled her glass with practiced ease. "Everything all right with the food?" he asked. "It's fine," she said automatically, though she couldn't have described what she'd tasted. "Lucas?" He glanced at her, attentive but guarded. "Yes." "You said you've been hungry," she said quietly. "Really hungry. And that's why you said what you did." He didn't flinch. "That's part of it." "And the other part?" she pressed. He rested the carafe on the table and folded his hands over his order pad, an unconscious gesture that made him look less like a server and more like someone about to give a statement under oath. "The other part," he said slowly, "is that I spend my days watching people with money forget what it felt like not to have it." Her jaw tightened. "You think I've forgotten?" He held her gaze for a second longer than was comfortable. "I think you're trying very hard to," he said, "and I think it's killing something in you." The words should have made her defensive. Instead, they landed with a dull, unmistakable weight of something she'd known and refused to name. She exhaled through her nose, the sound small but heavy. "You talk a lot like a therapist," she muttered, "for someone who brings bread to tables." He smiled faintly. "You learn a lot about people when you're invisible," he said. "You see what they're like when they think no one is really watching." "You're not invisible," she said automatically. He tilted his head. "A lot of people in this room would disagree." She followed his gaze. At a table near the center, an older couple sat with a younger man in an expensive suit. The younger man snapped his fingers, actually snapped when he wanted more wine. Lucas had turned toward them at the sound by reflex earlier, only to be waved away impatiently while they continued a conversation as if he were part of the furniture. At another table, A woman in designer heels had rolled her eyes when a busser accidentally brushed her chair while clearing plates. "Watch it," she'd hissed, as if the young man's existence was an inconvenience. Isabella had seen it before. She'd been in rooms where the staff were props, where politeness toward them was a performance, not a conviction. She had never liked it, but she had also stopped noticing it. "You watch all of that," she said. "I can't not," he replied. "It's my workplace, my world. You can tell a lot about someone by how they treat the people they think they'll never need." "And what have you learned?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew. "That money doesn't make anyone better," he said. "It just gives people more room to be who they already are. If they were kind before, they'll have more ways to be kind. If they were cruel before, they'll have more ways to be cruel." He looked back at her, and this time his gaze softened slightly. "And sometimes," he added, "money makes people build such thick walls around themselves that they forget how to feel anything at all." She shifted in her seat, unnerved by how accurately he described her last 5 years. "Let me guess," she said, forcing a lightness she didn't feel. "You figured all that out between shifts." "Between shifts," he agreed, "and between bills, and between watching people I love choose between groceries and medication." The casual way he said it made it hit harder. She studied him more closely. Up close, it was obvious he took care with everything he had. His uniform was clean, pressed, even if the fabric was a little faded at the seams. His shoes were worn but polished. His hair was pulled back neatly. Nothing flashy, nothing sloppy. Just intentional. She let her eyes drop, just for a second, and noticed something wedged between his order pad and the small leather folder he used for checks. It was a corner of a paperback book, the edges frayed, the cover creased. "Is that?" she asked, nodding toward it. He followed her gaze, then pulled the book out, almost sheepish. "Yeah," he said. "Sorry, I read on slower nights." She squinted at the title. It wasn't a novel. It wasn't a cookbook. It was a slim finance book about debt traps and inequity, the kind of text she'd seen cited in academic papers, but rarely on anyone's casual reading list. Her brows rose. "Light reading," she said. He gave a half shrug. "If you're stuck operating inside a system you didn't build, you might as well learn how it works," he said. "I can't change everything, but I can at least stop being blind to the game I'm in." She leaned back, feeling something shift in her chest. Here she was, one of the architects of those systems, sitting across from a man who navigated them from the bottom, and he was reading the same language she spoke, not to join her world, but to protect himself from it. "You said something earlier," she said slowly, "that people with money forget what it felt like when $10 mattered." He nodded. "Most do. It's easier to sleep if you pretend you never had to choose between food and shame." "And you?" she asked. "Have you forgotten?" He looked at her as if she'd asked whether he'd forgotten his own name. "That feeling doesn't leave," he said. "Even when things get better, your body remembers. You still flinch at the price of things. You still do math in your head every time you pick something up. You still feel guilty on the rare nights you let yourself enjoy something that isn't strictly necessary." She swallowed, her throat suddenly tight. "I still feel like that," she said quietly. He didn't look surprised. "Of course you do," he said. "You just have more zeros to hide behind." That line landed so cleanly, so precisely, that she almost laughed. "More zeros to hide it behind," she repeated. "Yeah," he said. "You've built a life where no one can see that part of you, unless you let them. That kind of power, it's seductive. It also means you can go years without anyone reminding you who you started out as." "And that's what you think you did tonight?" she asked. "Remind me?" He didn't flinch. "You asked," he said. "I answered." She let out a slow breath. This was the part of wealth no one talked about on magazine covers. The way it pulled you further and further from a version of yourself who knew what hunger felt like, not as a metaphor, but as an ache in your gut. She had run from that ache her whole life, built empires to outrun it, collected degrees, titles, properties. And yet this man, with his tray and his reading glasses and his frayed finance book, had reached back through all of it and touched the one place she kept locked. "Lucas," she said. "How old are you?" 32, he replied. Too young to sound as tired, she murmured. Too old to pretend the world is fair, he countered. Their eyes met. In that moment, the differences between them, net worth, education, access, didn't disappear. But something overcame them. A quiet understanding that fear, once learned, speaks the same language no matter how big your bank account gets. It was there in that fragile, uneasy truce between her hidden scars and his open eyes that the rest of their story began. This part of the script will be written in full prose in English, starting from topic 3 and keeping the same tone and style you used before. You can adjust pacing to hit 750 words per topic in your editor. Topic 3, when her joke turns into a real question. For a while after the reveal, the air between them stayed fragile, like thin glass that might shatter if either of them spoke too loudly. Cutlery clinked at nearby tables. Waiters moved and practiced lines. Someone laughed at the bar. But at Isabella's table, time felt slowed and strangely sharp. She kept replaying the moment in her head. Her own voice, careless and amused, asking a waiter for financial advice as a joke, and his answer that cut right through every layer of distance she had built around herself. Don't forget what it felt like when $10 was the difference between eating and pretending you weren't hungry. She could have left it there. She could have let it be an uncomfortable but forgettable encounter. Finished her meal, signed the bill, and walked back into her bulletproof world. But something in her rebelled at that idea. The food arrived, beautifully plated, expensively sourced, perfectly irrelevant. Lucas set each dish down with the same calm precision he'd shown all evening, naming the ingredients, offering a brief suggestion for wine as she wanted it. His tone had returned to professional neutrality, as if the conversation they'd had was already filed away under things best forgotten. She picked up her fork, put it down again. "Lucas," she said quietly. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, straightening a little. "The thing I asked before," she said, "about financial advice." He hesitated, reading her face. "You wanted to apologize?" he asked. "I didn't mean to be disrespectful." She surprised herself by shaking her head. "No, I don't want an apology," she said. "I want an answer." He blinked. "I already gave you one." "You gave me a warning," she said. "I'm asking you a different question now." He stayed silent, waiting. She took a breath. "If you were me," she said slowly, "if you woke up tomorrow with what I have, this much money, this much access, what's the very first thing you do with it?" She watched him carefully. Most people, when presented with that scenario, answered instantly. House, cars, travel. Never work again. Lucas didn't. His brow furrowed slightly. He didn't look excited. He looked concerned, as if she'd asked him to solve a complicated problem, not imagine a fantasy. "I'd pay off everything that could destroy me if I got sick or unlucky," he said finally. "Debts, medical bills, anything with interest attached to it like teeth." She tilted her head. "Not a new car? A house somewhere quiet? A yacht?" She pushed just to see. He gave a small, almost sad smile. "Those things can wait," he said. "Fear can't." His answer landed like a stone in a still pond. She felt the ripples moving outward through memories she tried to bury. The late notices, the calls from collectors, the way her chest had clenched whenever an unknown number appeared on her phone. "Interesting," she said, voice a little hoarse. "Most wealthy people I know talk about making their money work for them first. Only people who aren't scared can think about working before breathing," he replied. "If you've ever had a night where you weren't sure the lights would still be on next month, the first thing money should buy you is the right to stop panicking." She studied him. "Buy time, not toys," she murmured. "Exactly," he said. "Time to think clearly. Time to make better choices. Time to say no." She narrowed her eyes slightly. "You keep talking about no like it's a luxury." "It is," he said simply. "Most people serve, yes, their whole lives. Yes, I'll take the extra shift so I don't lose my job. Yes, I'll accept that rent hike because I can't afford to move. Yes, I'll tolerate being disrespected because complaining might get me replaced. The first thing I buy is enough margin to say no when something is bad for me." Isabella leaned back in her chair, her appetite evaporating as his words fed something deeper. "So for you, money is what?" "Freedom?" she asked. He shook his head. No, freedom is bigger than that. For me, money is oxygen. Freedom is what you do once you can finally breathe. She went very still, because she remembered too vividly the years when she'd lived breath to breath. And she also recognized with sudden, unwelcome clarity that somewhere along the way, she'd stopped using money like oxygen and started using it like armor, layers and layers of it. Heavy, impressive, suffocating. You know, she said slowly, I sit on panels with people who manage billions, and half of them talk about money with less sense than you just did. He shrugged lightly. Maybe they forgot what it's like not to have it. Or maybe they never knew, she said. Their eyes met for a moment that felt heavier than the entire dining room. She saw no greed in his gaze, no calculation, just a strange mix of realism and faith. You're not afraid to talk to me like this, she observed. Should I be? He asked. Most people are, she said. They trip over themselves to impress me, to flatter me, to prove they deserve something. What do you want them to do? He asked. She opened her mouth, closed it. The answer came out more honest than she intended. I want them to be real, she said. But nobody ever is. Maybe they think you don't want real, he replied. Maybe they think you only speak numbers now. She flinched just a little. It was such a simple sentence. It felt like a diagnosis. What about you? She deflected. If you had more money than you needed, what's the second thing you do? After safety. He didn't even pause this time. I'd buy back my time, he said. So I could spend my life on things that matter, not things that just keep the lights on. Her fork slipped against the plate with a tiny scrape. Because for all her wealth, for all her influence, when was the last time she felt like her time was truly hers? She had turned a joke into a question. He had turned the question into a mirror. And for the first time in a very long time, Isabella Cortez did not like what she saw looking back. The main course had gone cold. Isabella realized it only when her fork met resistance, not from the food, but from the stiffness in her own hand. She set it down slowly, fingers unsteady in a way that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the conversation simmering between them. Earlier, she said, when you talk about $10 being the difference between eating and pretending you weren't hungry, you weren't guessing, were you? Lucas was collecting empty plates from the neighboring table. At her words, his movements paused for just a fraction of a second. Then he stacked the dishes, dropped off the tray at a nearby station, and came back to her table with nothing in his hands. Nowhere to hide them. He didn't sit this time. He stood by the chair across from her, hand resting lightly on the back of it, posture straight but not stiff. No, he said quietly. I wasn't guessing. Tell me, she said. He studied her for a moment, as if trying to decide whether she wanted a story or the truth. The difference, she knew, was enormous. My mother, he began, worked nights at a cleaning company and days at a bakery. We lived in a one-bedroom apartment that smelled like bleach and sugar, depending on the time of day. A small, involuntary smile touched his lips at the memory. She used to say we lived in the cleanest, sweetest corner of the city. Was it? Isabella asked softly. Sometimes, he said, when we weren't worrying about eviction notices or whether the fridge would be empty before payday. Her throat tightened. The words were too familiar. I remember this one night, he continued. I was maybe 8, old enough to know things were bad, not old enough to do anything about it. We had 1 can of soup and some stale bread. She heated the soup, sliced the bread, and told me to sit at the table. She served me most of the soup and took a little for herself. He swallowed. His eyes were focused on a point somewhere past her shoulder, seeing a kitchen she'd never entered. I asked why she wasn't eating more, he said. She smiled and said, I grabbed something earlier at work. I'm not very hungry. Isabella closed her eyes for a second. She already knew the ending. I believed her, he said, because kids want to think their parents are invincible. Only later, when I was older, did I realize there was no way she'd eaten earlier. We didn't have the money. That meal at work was a lie she told. So I wouldn't have to choose between my own hunger and hers. He drew a slow breath. After that, I started pretending too. Pretending what? she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Pretending I wasn't hungry, he said. When there was enough, I'd tell her I'd already eaten with friends, or that I'd had a big lunch. I'd drink water until my stomach felt full and hope she'd take the hint. The simplicity of it made her chest ache. You were a child, she said. You shouldn't have had to think like that. Shouldn't, he agreed. But the world doesn't really care about should. It just is. And in our world, $10 wasn't a casual expense. It was a question. Soup for the week or heat, bus fare to work or medicine. It was never just a number. It was a decision with teeth. He looked at her then, eyes clear, no trace of self-pity. When you live like that long enough, he said, you never see money the same way again. It's not points. It's not status. It's not a game. It's a line between breathing and drowning. Isabella felt something hot sting the back of her eyes. She looked down, blinking it away. She remembered her own mother working 2 jobs, counting coins at the kitchen table, rubbing her temples as if the math itself hurt. She remembered pretending to be full at school so she could bring home half her lunch. She had told herself she'd escape that life. She had never told herself she'd forgiven it. So when you said what you did, she murmured, you weren't just giving advice. You were guarding something. He nodded. People who never live like that talk about risk differently, he said. To them, risk is a number on a chart. To us, risk was waking up and realizing one bad week could erase everything. The people around me now, she said slowly, call losing $10 million a rough quarter. $10 million to them is probably less than $10 was to you, he said. Doesn't make them evil, just distant. She let that sink in. You watch people a lot, she said. I have to, he answered. A waiter's job isn't just carrying plates. It's reading moods, knowing when to step in and when to vanish. You learn fast who's kind, who's dangerous, who tips big and treats you small. And me? She asked, meeting his gaze. Which am I? He considered his words carefully. You're dangerous, he said, but not in the way you think. How then? She pressed. You're so used to controlling money that you've started believing money is the safest thing about you, he said. But the part of you that remembers $10, that's the part that scares you. So you bury it under numbers. The accuracy of it stole her breath. How can you see that? She asked. Just by refilling my water? He smiled faintly. I've been poor long enough to recognize the look of someone who's scared of being that way again, he said. It doesn't go away just because the zeros multiply. She didn't respond right away. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound small in the face of that truth. Do you hate rich people? She asked finally. No, he said. I hate thoughtless people. Some of them are rich. Some of them are broke. I've seen wealthy customers treat us like trash and leave huge tips to ease their conscience. I've also seen people count coins for a coffee and still leave $1 because they know what it's like to stand on this side of the tray. And what am I? She whispered. He held her gaze. Undecided, he said. That's why I answered your joke, like it was a real question. For the first time in a very long time, Isabella felt like she wasn't being evaluated for her net worth, her portfolio, or her performance. She was being weighed on something far more terrifying, her humanity. The restaurant had begun to quiet. A few tables finished dessert. Couples leaned closer. The bar emptied of suits and filled with softer voices. Outside, the rain had turned to a fine mist that blurred the streetlights into halos. Inside, at a corner, table meant to shield her from the world. Isabella felt more exposed than she had in years. You know, she said slowly, tracing the rim of her wine glass with one finger, I can't remember the last time someone talked to me like this without wanting something. What do you think I want? Lucas asked, genuinely curious. If you were like everyone else, she said, access, a job, a favor, an introduction, a check. And if I told you I wanted none of that, he asked, I wouldn't believe you, she admitted. He nodded as if that was fair. She exhaled, the air leaving her chest like she'd been holding it for a very long time. You said earlier that money is oxygen, she said. That freedom is what you do once you can breathe. For me, money has felt like armor. Armor he repeated. To stop everything from hurting again, she said. To shut out uncertainty, humiliation, the feeling of walking into a bank and praying my card works. I thought if I built enough around me, enough success, enough reputation, enough steel, nothing could touch me. And, he asked quietly, and I still can't sleep, she said. The confession surprised her as much as it did him. She laughed once, harsh and humorless. I have more than I ever thought possible, she said. I can buy houses I'll never live in and cars I'll never drive. I can fund companies and make people billionaires before they're 40. I can donate sums that look impressive in press releases. She paused, swallowed. But at 3 a.m, she continued, I still wake up with the same panic I had in that studio apartment, wondering if everything could vanish. If I'm one bad call away from losing it all. If I'll end up back where I started, older and more exhausted. The words spilled out now, years of pressure finally finding a crack. I still hoard shampoo bottles from hotel bathrooms, she said, shaking her head. I still keep a jar of coins in my kitchen. I still feel guilty every time I order something that isn't on sale. I've signed deals worth billions, and I still freeze when the waiter brings a check for half a second, like I might not be able to cover it. Lucas didn't laugh. He didn't dismiss it. That makes sense, he said simply. Does it? She asked, almost angrily. Because everyone around me acts like I should be grateful, calm, generous. They call me lucky, as if that explains everything. They don't understand that when you've lived with financial terror long enough, the terror doesn't leave. It just changes costumes. Money didn't make you safe, he said quietly. It just upgraded your fear. Her eyes snapped to his. Say that again, she whispered. Money didn't make you safe, he repeated. It just changed what you're scared of. Before it was rent, food, survival. Now it's reputation. Loss. Being exposed as someone who still remembers what it's like to be broke. Something inside her cracked. Silently, but irrevocably. She heard fluff about rich people problems on talk shows. She'd heard coaches say, new level, new devil, in glossy seminars. No one had ever said it this plainly. Your fear grew with your fortune because you never learned how to live without it. For someone who carries plates, she said, voice unsteady, you carry a lot of insight. He smiled faintly. You're not the only one who listens for a living, he said. I just do it from a different side of the table. Her vision blurred for a moment. She blinked, annoyed at herself. Isabella, he said gently. She stiffened. Very few people said her first name without a title attached. What? She asked. You're allowed to not be bulletproof, he said. You know that, right? The absurdity of hearing that from a man with an hourly wage nearly made her laugh. But instead of scoffing, she felt her throat close. I don't know how, she admitted, voice raw. I'm afraid if I stop being invincible for 1 second, everything will collapse. People expect me to know, to decide, to save them from their own mistakes. There's no room in that for this. She gestured vaguely at the table, at herself, at the invisible tangle of feelings between them. Maybe not in your world, he said, but at a table like this, there is. You asked a question as a joke. Now you're asking for real. What question? She asked, though she knew. How to be rich without being poor where it matters, he said. How to have money without letting it rewrite who you are. She let the words wash over her. For the first time since she crossed from survival into abundance, she felt like someone understood the problem she couldn't quite name. And the strangest part wasn't that he understood, it was that she trusted him. By the time dessert arrived, neither of them cared about the food. A delicate chocolate creation sat untouched in the center of the table, perfect and irrelevant. The real meal was a conversation, raw, unscripted, and increasingly dangerous. You said earlier I might be broken the way that counts, Isabella said. Explain that. Lucas hesitated. A lesser man might have backed away, softened his words, tried to protect her ego. He didn't. Okay, he said. You're financially rich. That's obvious. You've won the game most people never get to play. Generous of you to acknowledge, she said dryly. But, he continued, if your wealth has cut you off from empathy, from remembering what fear feels like, from understanding what $10 means to a person on the edge, then in that sense, you're poor. She stared at him, stunned by the boldness. You think I've lost my empathy? She asked, a dangerous edge creeping into her tone. I think, he said carefully, you've been encouraged to ignore it. Every system around you, boards, media, investors, rewards you for being efficient, not compassionate, for seeing numbers instead of faces. He leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice. When you joked about asking me for financial advice, he said, you weren't mocking me. You were mocking yourself. Some part of you knows you've drifted from a version of you that used to sit in this restaurant counting pennies. You miss her, and you're terrified she'd be disappointed in who you've let yourself become. Her jaw clenched. You don't know who I've become, she said. I know what you started to forget, he replied. You told me yourself. You structure your philanthropy like a strategy. You treat generosity like PR. You donate to institutions that speak your language instead of people who speak your history. Anger surged in her chest, not at him, but at the accuracy. You think it's that simple? She snapped. Write a few checks to people who look like my past, and suddenly I'm rich where it counts again? No, he said. I think it starts simpler than that. With remembering that every financial decision at your level affects lives the way $10 once affected yours. He held her gaze steadily. Look, he said, I'm not here to judge how you use your money. It's yours. You earned it, but you asked me for advice. So here it is. He took a breath. If your money isolates you from a version of yourself who survived on nothing, then your money owns you, he said. You're not free. You're just heavily decorated. The words were so unexpected she almost laughed. Heavily decorated, she repeated. Like a fortress, he said. Impressive from the outside, cold on the inside. She opened her mouth to fire back, then stopped, because behind the metaphor, she recognized the architecture of her own life, the private elevator, the security systems, the thick glass windows with a perfect view of a city she rarely touched anymore. How dare you, she said softly, not as a threat, but as a genuine question. How dare you talk to me like this and not ask for anything? He smiled, and for the first time, it reached his eyes. Maybe that's the point, he said. The people who want something from you can't afford to tell you the truth. They're scared you'll cut them off. I'm already on the outside. I have nothing to lose by being honest. That's not entirely true, she said. You could lose your job. Your manager could. Fire me, he finished. Maybe, but there are worse things than losing a job. Like losing yourself so completely that the only people who ever tell you you're wrong are headlines after it's too late. Silence stretched between them, dense and electric. For the first time in a very long time, Isabella wasn't the one holding power in a conversation, and she realized something unsettling. She didn't hate it. Being challenged without being exploited felt clean. Painful, but clean. You know what the sad part is? She asked quietly. What? He replied. If you were on my payroll as a consultant, she said, I'd probably ignore everything you just said. I'd assume you were angling for more hours, more influence, a bigger retainer. But because you're saying it here, in this uniform, with nothing to gain. You believe me, he finished. She nodded, almost reluctantly. He sat back slightly, giving her space. You're not broken, Ms. Cortez, he said. You're just misaligned. Your money and your memory are pulling in different directions until you bring them back together. You'll keep trying to buy peace with numbers that can't provide it. And how do I do that? She asked, the question leaving her lips before pride could stop it. He thought for a moment, then said, start by making one decision that will make the old you proud, not just the current you richer. The simplicity of it nearly undid her, because she knew instantly what that decision might be, and it terrified her. The restaurant staff began their quiet, closing rituals. Lights dimmed another notch. The music softened. A busser stacked in used chairs in the corner. A couple slipped out the door, laughing under a shared umbrella. Time, which had felt heavy and slow, started moving again. But at Isabella's table, the clock was still paused on a single question now echoing between them. Make one decision that would make the old you proud. She couldn't stop thinking about it. The old her, the girl who'd studied under flickering lights, the young woman who'd eaten cereal with water because milk was a luxury, the analyst who'd walked past the same restaurant for months, saving up for one bowl of soup and a glass of cheap wine, because she needed to feel just once like she belonged somewhere nice. "What would you do?" she asked finally. Lucas looked up from the bill folder he'd just dropped on another table. "With what?" "With access," she said. "With the power to move letters in front of numbers. With $1 billion. He smiled faintly. "I already answered that." "Safety first, then time." She said, "Yes, but I don't mean that. I mean beyond survival. Beyond your rent and your mother's medical bills. Beyond your brother's tuition. Past all the obvious answers. If all of that was taken care of, then what?" He leaned his weight on the back of the empty chair, considering. "I'd build something that outlives me," he said. "Not a building with my name on it. A system. A habit. A place where people who grew up like I did can walk in and learn how not to stay there forever." "You mean financial education," she said. "I mean financial dignity," he corrected. "There's a difference. Education tells you what compound interest is. Dignity teaches you that you deserve more than debt your whole life." He watched her as he spoke, measuring how much she was really hearing. "I'd make sure there were free classes in neighborhoods where payday lenders outnumber libraries," he continued. "I'd fund small local groups that help people read contracts before they sign away their lives. I'd create emergency funds that don't require humiliation to access. He stopped, laughing softly. "Sorry, I've thought about this a lot." "Don't apologize," she said. "Keep going." He did. "I'd create internships that actually pay enough to live on so kids don't have to choose between experience and eating. I'd partner with community centers to bring in people who grew up broke and figured out, not just polished experts who talk in jargon." Her mind, trained to calculate, was already assembling the numbers, the cost, the scale, the impact. It was feasible, more than feasible. It was cleaner and more targeted than half the initiatives her foundation currently funded. "How many times," she asked, "have you pitched this to someone?" "This?" he said, startled. "Never. I'm a waiter. I talk to people about specials and refills, not systemic change." "But you have the plan," she pressed. "In my head," he admitted, "and in a notebook at home, if that counts." "It does," she said. He looked almost embarrassed. "You probably have a dozen reports on your desk right now from consultants saying the same things, but with better graphics." "No," she said. "I have reports telling me how to optimize my philanthropy for publicity and tax efficiency. They don't talk about dignity. They talk about visibility." The difference hung between them. "Lucas," she said slowly, "do you know how many people sit in front of me every year and tell me where my money should go?" "I'm guessing a lot," he said. "Do you know how many of them talk about what $10 means?" she asked. He was silent. "None," she answered for him. "Not one." He looked away, jaw tightening. "You asked me earlier what I'd do if I were you," he said. "Now I have a different question." "Go on," she said. "What are you afraid will happen if you start using your money the way the old you would have wanted?" he asked. "Really?" Her throat went dry. "Afraid?" she echoed. "Yes," he said. "Afraid. Because something is stopping you, and it's not lack of ideas. It's not lack of resources. It's fear." She opened her mouth to deny it. The reflex was automatic. But then the truth, sharpened by his earlier words, cut through her defense. "I'm afraid," she said slowly, "that if I start acting like the girl I used to be, this world will stop taking me seriously. That I'll lose my seat at the table. That the people who listen to me now will stop." "Stop what?" he asked gently. "Stop listening. Stop calling. Stop inviting me into rooms where decisions get made," she said. "And then I'll be back on the outside, watching other people make choices that hurt the people I came from." He nodded. "So you've traded one kind of fear for another?" "Yes," she whispered. "And which one hurts more?" he asked. "The fear of going back, or the fear of staying where you are and doing nothing real with what you've been given?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The answer was already sitting in her silence. Closing time approached. The last customers paid their bills. Chairs were flipped upside down on the tables, and the bar staff began their final wipe down of the counters. The restaurant that had once felt like a refuge now felt like a crossroads. "Do you need anything else tonight, Ms. Cortez?" Lucas asked, slipping back into his professional tone. "Yes," she said. "I need you to sit down. Properly. Not on the edge like you're waiting to run." He hesitated, glancing toward the bar. The manager was busy arguing softly with a supplier on the phone. The other waiters were in the back, counting tips, exchanging tired jokes. Slowly, Lucas pulled out the chair and sat. This time, he rested his forearms on the table, no longer hovering. "Okay," he said. "I'm sitting." She folded her hands together, suddenly aware of how insane this would sound to anyone else. "Lucas," she said, "how would you feel about giving me financial advice for real?" He blinked. "I what?" "Not about my portfolio," she clarified. "I have entire teams for that. About my impact. About where the money goes when it leaves my accounts with words like donation attached to it." He shook his head slowly, as if clearing water from his ears. "Ms. Cortez, I'm a waiter who reads finance books on his breaks." "I'm not." "You're someone who understands what $10 means," she interrupted. "You're someone who sees how systems land on actual people, not just in reports. That makes you more qualified than half the people pitching me their philanthropic visions. But in your world," he said, "I'm nobody. In my world," she said, "you are exactly the voice that's missing." He stared at her, processing. "What would that even look like?" he asked. "Me advising you? You'd meet with me," she said. "Not in front of cameras. Not at fancy events. In rooms where decisions start, not where they get announced. You'd look at my foundation's existing projects. You'd tell me where the money looks good on paper, but doesn't actually change anything. You'd help design initiatives that make sense to the people they're supposed to help." He swallowed. "And you'd pay me for this?" "I pay consultants hundreds of thousands to tell me less than you have tonight," she said. "Yes, I pay you. Fairly. And if you want to study further, formally, informally, I'd fund that too." The magnitude of the offer hung in the air. "Why me?" he asked finally. "Because you spoke when you had nothing to gain," she said. "Because you weren't dazzled by my name or my money. Because you weren't afraid to tell me I'm rich and poor at the same time. You could find someone else like that," he said. "Someone with credentials, degrees." "Probably," she said. "But I didn't. I found you." He looked down at his hands, calloused, steady, the hands that carried plates and empty glasses. Hands that had learned to move quickly and carefully in spaces where he was expected to disappear. "This would change my life," he said softly. "I know," she replied. "It could also go very wrong," he added. "People in your world might not want someone like me in those conversations." "Then we won't introduce you as someone like you," she said. "We'll introduce you as an advisor. No one needs to know you also work nights here unless you want them to." He laughed once, the sound disbelieving. "You're serious." "Deadly," she said. He went quiet. The weight of possibility pressed on his shoulders like a physical thing. "I have one condition," he said at last. "Name it," she replied. "You don't get to turn this into a marketing story," he said. "No press releases about how you lifted a waiter from obscurity or whatever narrative your people would spin. If I do this, it's because the work matters, not because it makes you look good." She felt something like pride stir in her chest. "Agreed," she said. "No headlines, no trophies, just work." He nodded slowly. "Then yes," he said. "I'll help. I don't know how yet. I don't know if I'll be any good at it, but I'll try." "That's all I'm asking," she said. For a moment, they just sat there, two people from opposite sides of the economic universe, now bound by an agreement that had nothing to do with tips or televised interviews. "Lucas," she added. "Yeah," he replied. "Earlier, you said I'm misaligned," she said. "That my money and my memory are pulling in different directions." "I did," he said. She met his eyes. "Help me fix that," she said. "Not just for me. For everyone my decisions touch." He nodded once, slowly. "I will," he said. And for the first time in years, the idea of using her money didn't feel like pressure. It felt like purpose. Months passed. The restaurant on that rainy Thursday became a footnote in Isabella's official calendar, a client dinner at a nondescript bistro. But in her real life, the one that existed beneath board meetings and broadcast interviews, that night had split her story into a before and an after. In after, things changed. Not loudly at first. Quietly, her foundation's grand proposals began to look different. There were fewer glossy partnerships with massive institutions, more focused investments in community-based organizations. Evaluation metrics shifted from media impressions to debt reduced, emergencies averted, people no longer had to choose between medicine and rent. In private meetings, when advisors suggested projects that seemed more like branding exercises and solutions, she started asking blunt questions. How does this change the way fear feels for someone at the bottom? Where exactly does the money touch a real life? If we disappeared tomorrow, would anyone besides our PR team notice? At first, people thought she was going through a phase, a mid-career rebranding, a humanizing effort. Then they noticed it wasn't passing. Behind closed doors, in a small conference room without windows, she and Lucas sat across from each other more times than either of them had expected. He came prepared, with notes, with observations, with stories from the neighborhoods her old strategies had never really reached. He asked uncomfortable questions about overhead, about who sat on boards, about why decisions were made in buildings miles away from the problems they were supposed to address. He was not polished. He didn't use slide decks. He sometimes had to stop and search for the right terminology, but he was precise where it mattered. And she listened. One evening, many months after that first dinner, Isabella found herself at a closed-door gathering of the ultra-wealthy. No cameras, no journalists, just money and designer clothing, sitting in a circle of leather chairs, sipping rare wine and discussing impact. They took turns sharing their latest philanthropic victories, a new wing at a museum, a donor plaque in a university hallway, a high-profile partnership with a global brand. When it was her turn, all eyes turned expectantly. The moderator smiled. "Isabella, you've been making waves lately," he said. "Tell us about your latest initiative." She thought of the old her, what she would have said. Something impressive. Something safe. Instead, she said, "I realized recently that my philanthropy was designed to impress people like us more than it was designed to relieve fear for people who will never sit in this room." Murmurs. Shifts in chairs. A tightening of shoulders. "I've started working with a new advisor," she continued. "Someone who understands what $10 means when it stands between you and hunger." The moderator leaned forward. "A new advisor? From which firm?" "From a restaurant," she said. The silence was instant and sharp. "He's a waiter," she added calmly. "He grew up poor. He knows what it feels like to pretend you're full, so your mother will eat. He knows what predatory lending looks like on a corner store sign. He knows how it feels when a donation comes with strings that make people feel small." A few people shifted uncomfortably. Someone chuckled, thinking it must be a joke. "I asked him for financial advice as a joke once," she said. "He gave me the clearest definition of wealth I've ever heard. I decided I was done being advised only by people who have never missed a meal." "And you trust this waiter?" one man asked, unable to keep the skepticism from his tone. "With my humanity," she replied. "The money, frankly, is the easy part." She didn't name Lucas. She didn't tell his story like a trophy. She simply let the idea sit in that room, that their expertise might be missing something essential. Later, after the event, she stepped into a quiet side room where coffee had been set out. Lucas sat at a small table in the corner, a simple notebook open in front of him. He wasn't mingling. He wasn't networking. He was reviewing numbers for a new emergency fund pilot they were designing. "How'd it go?" he asked, looking up. "I think I scared them," she said. "Good," he replied. "Comfort doesn't change much." She sat down across from him. "You know, they think I've lost my mind," she said, taking advice from someone who still works shifts. "Do you think you've lost your mind?" he asked. She thought about it. "No," she said. For the first time, I think I might be getting it back." He smiled, closing the notebook. "Then let them think what they want," he said. "As long as someone out there sleeps better because the lights stay on, I don't really care what a room full of comfortable people thinks of me." She studied him. This man who had walked into her life carrying plates and left carrying part of her moral compass. "You know," she said quietly, "in every interview, they ask me who my greatest financial influence was. I always say some famous economist or mentor. I think they'd choke if I told them the truth." "Which is," he asked. "That the best financial advice I ever got," she said, "was from a waiter who reminded me what $10 feels like." He huffed a small laugh. "You don't have to say that in public," he said. "It's enough that you live like it's true." She nodded. Outside that quiet room, the world continued to spin on its usual axis of numbers and noise. Deals were signed. Markets fluctuated. Headlines were written. Inside, at a small table with 2 coffee cups, a billionaire and a waiter went over plans for the next initiative. Debt relief that came without humiliation. Education that honored people's intelligence instead of talking down to them. Emergency funds that treated crises as human, not statistical. She had all the money she'd once prayed for. He had the clarity she didn't know she'd lost. Together, they began to move wealth in a way that neither of them, alone, could have done. Because in the end, the joke she made at that restaurant table hadn't just embarrassed her. It had introduced her to the one advisor who would never be impressed by her net worth, only by what she did with it.